So, thank you so much, Rok, for joining again for the second lecture, the actual planned lecture.
Sure,
So,
pleasure.
yeah. So, yeah, Dwadashamsa. We still have 1 more minute to go, but we are already there. So,
Yeah, we're going to talk about the 12th parts, or Dvadasamsha, or
yeah. Okay, I'll just stop my video and audio as usual, and you can just let me know. Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm ready. Okay, so welcome everyone who's watching, and welcome you who is watching later. Yes, this morning I gave a lecture on the Vargas, the subdivisions of the zodiac, and now we're going to look at the 12th division, also known as 12th parts, or Dvadasamsha, or it's called also by different names. This is a division that we find in basically all the systems of zodiacal astrology, all the ancient systems, be it Indian or Western. So I'll just start my presentation. Yes. So the 12 parts. I named this presentation Hidden Layer of a Horoscope, because that's what it is. The concept of the 12 parts. If I ask you, imagine that you are presented with a 12-fold division of a circle. Okay, let us just leave this tractor go by so we don't have the noise. Sorry about that. Yeah, so we have 12-fold division of the circle, the zodiac. And if I tell you that, okay, now divide these 12-fold division, these signs, further into smaller parts, I guess most of us will say, okay, let's just divide them further into 12 parts. So the concept of the 12 parts of the 12 division comes quite naturally. It's kind of, the most intuitive, the most natural division we can think of. So the name of the 12 parts in India is Dwadashamsha. Dwadasha means 12 and Amsha means a part. And in Greek and Latin it was called Dodecatemoria, or singular it's Dodecatemorion or Dodecatemori. It depends on the language and the text. There are various different variations of the name, but generally it's Dodecatemoria. Dodeca means 12 and moiria is a part, a fraction, or a degree. So basically we have the same meaning, the 12th part. So henceforward I will call this 12 parts. If we look at the 12 parts in a circle in the zodiac, it looks like this. Every sign has 12 2.5 degree portions, which are the 12 parts. And every sign starts with its own 12th part and then continues in the natural order of the signs. So if we zoom in and look at the sign of Aquarius, it starts with Aquarius and then proceeds in the natural order of the signs and ends with the 12th sign from it, Capricorn. And it goes the same for every sign. So this would be basically how we would see in the 12th parts, just as these 2.5 degree portions, but there are also different methods, and we will look at them soon. There are two calculations, as I said. The first way is to simply see in which of the 2.5 degree portions a planet is located, so as I mentioned before. This method is used for techniques where we only want to know the sign of the 12 parts. So for example, a planet falls in the first 12th part, so let's say a planet is at 2 degrees of Aquarius, it means that it falls in Aquarius 12th part. If it's in the, say, 3 degrees Aquarius, it falls in Pisces 12th part, and so on. So in this way we can quickly do this in the mind. We don't even need to see it visually so much. So this method is used when we only need to know the 12th part position. We can construct a simplified Varga chart out of it without having any degrees, just placement in the signs. This is mostly Indian approach, and as I said, it can be done easily in one's mind. And the second way is more complex, and is to calculate them to the degree, as if one microzodiac of 30 degrees would be a full 360-degree circle. This method is used when we are superimposing the 12th part positions onto the radix chart, onto the main chart or Rashi chart. It's used for constructing more precise degree-based Varga chart where we have the exact degrees of planets also known. And here in this presentation we will look at this second type, this second method. So we will calculate accurate to the degree, and then we'll see later. I will not reveal too much yet. So how we calculate the 12th parts exactly to a degree? We look at the degrees and minutes of a planet. The degrees and minutes as counted from the beginning of the sign the planet is in. Then we multiply the degrees by 12 because we are concerned with the 12th division. Then we multiply the minutes by 12, so not only degrees, also the minutes, and convert the result into degrees. And add this to the degrees we got by multiplication first. Then we add the result to 0 degrees of the sign the planet is in. In this way, we arrive at the exact 12th part position. So we basically just start from the sign the planet is in, and then add the number of degrees, the result that we got to the beginning of the sign. And we will also look at the method of superimposition, as I have mentioned earlier, because the principle here is that there is only one Aries, really. It's not that we have many different instances of Aries. Aries is only one. There's only one cardinal fire. And Taurus is only one. It's only one fixed earth, and so on. In this way, we will superimpose the Varga positions, which I will show soon. So this prevents us to go too far with it and to suddenly have a totally separate chart with new sets of houses. So here we do not construct a new chart, and the houses remain those of the main chart. We simply superimpose the 12th part positions onto the radix chart. It is like stacking 12 microzodiacs of 12 degrees each on top of the 360 degree zodiac. And this in practice looks like this. Here we have a round wheel, which is my preferred visual representation of a horoscope. And in the inside circle, of course, we have the radix, the Rashi positions of the planets. And outside of it, we have the 12th part positions calculated by the multiplication method that I have described. And if anyone wants to see an example of the calculation, you can visit my website, rokkoritnikastrologer.com, go to articles, and you will find the article on the Dvadasamsha where I'm explaining it in detail and also showing some examples. So this is how it looks like. So the houses, although we have the ascendant in different, it can be, and for the most part it will be, in a different 12th part, it's not that we're counting new houses from this ascendant. No, the houses still remain these houses of the radix chart. And planets are simply changing the positions in the houses. So in this case, Saturn, instead of being in the 3rd house, by the 12th part position, it comes to the 2nd house, and so on. And we will look at many examples later. Something that needs to be clarified is that this is not the 12th harmonic, although some people would say, yes, the Dvadasamsha is the 12th harmonic. It is not. The difference is that in the 12th harmonic, the first portion of every sign is always Aries. So here the signs begin with their own sign. But in 12th harmonic, all of them begin with Aries. Although the calculation is similar, so one could be deceived even. But the difference is that for the 12th harmonic, we take the longitude from 0 Aries and not from the beginning of the sign. So we measure the longitude of the planet as counted from 0 degrees Aries, multiply this amount of degrees, and then add the result from 0 Aries and not from the beginning of the sign. And this is how the 12th harmonic looks in the circle. Basically we get a what we have is the relationship between 2 points, 2 12th parts of Aries in this case, is the angular relationship of a semi-sextile. So it's a different thing. While the 12th parts, the classical 12 parts, are not based on any specific angular relationship. They're not so much about geometry as is the case with the 12th harmonic, but they are based on the division of the sign itself, while the 12th harmonic is based on the division of the whole circle into 12 parts. And the 12 divisions of the sign are simply a consequence of that. And now we will look at what the ancient classical texts say on the 12 parts. First we will look at one interesting author from Sicily from the 4th century, Firmicus Maternus, who advocated the use of the 12 parts very intensely. He says, "Look carefully at the decatemorion of the sun and its terms." So here we will continually we will find this reference to the terms, which in my previous lecture I have dealt with the trimsamshas, which are similar to terms. So this is a 5-fold division of a sign that is ruled by 5 non-luminary planets. So here he says, look carefully at the decatemorion, the 12th part of the sun, and its terms. So in which term, the 5-fold division, the 12th part falls in, which is interesting. So we are taking one division and we are reading it from its position into another division, so that the teaching of this book may not lead you into any error. And then further he says, look carefully at the decatemorion of the moon and its terms. Again, the 12th part and its terms. For whatever is concealed in the chart, in the general combination of the planets, is made obvious in the Decatemorion and its terms. If you wish to set forth the whole essence of the forecast from the Decatemorion, you will not be deceived. The Babylonians attribute all the forecasts to the Decatemorion, but Ptolemy to the Antischia, and we to both. So he stresses, actually after delineating every planet, at the end he's always saying, if you want to know the whole power of Saturn, for example, look at the position of his 12th part and its terms, and then for every planet he's stressing this. Then Yavana Jataka, an interesting Indian text, which is kind of a hybrid between the Hellenistic astrology and native Indian astrology, also treats the 12 parts, the Dvadasamshas, in a similar way. But first it tells us what they are, how they must be read. It says, in each sign there are Dvadasamshas, the Decatemoria, which fill the sign with their own influences. There are subtle modifications in respect to height or depth of action when their influences are combined with those of the terms Trimsamshas. So we get the same idea here. And further, Yavana Jataka states, the influence of the planets in the degrees of their exaltation is complete in their Navamshas as in their Mula Trikonas, and in their Dvadasamshas as in their houses, as in their signs. So here it gives us a guideline by which we know that if a planet is in his own Dvadasamsha, in his own 12th part, then it is as good as being in its own sign, which is an important piece of information. So it's basically a modification of dignity, an important thing. The sun and the moon, how are 12 parts connected with the sun and the moon? Symbolically, because we have 12 in one, 12 units in one unit, the 12 parts reflect the solar-lunar cycle. The bounds and Trimsamshas, the fivefold division that we have mentioned earlier, and it will continue to be important here, are ruled by 5 non-luminaries. But looking at the 12th part of the lights in the bounds, as we have seen, so we're looking at the 12th part position in the bound it falls in, connects a division that's based on the luminaries with the division based on non-luminaries. Thus, in my opinion, according to my reasoning, it's connecting consciousness, which is the sun and the moon, with one of its agents, which are the, some would say, elementary planets. Vedios Valens especially stresses the position of the 12th part of the moon. And why would that be important? Well, the moon is the mind-body complex. At least in traditional Hellenistic tradition, the moon is considered to be connected to the mind and the body, while the sun is more of a spirit. The moon is the fastest, so is the most individualized of all planets. And the moon changes her 12th part in about 5 hours. So of course it is very important to see for people that are born on the same day. So the 12 parts, as said, we are dividing a sign in a micro zodiac. So we are dealing with something that's subtle and hidden. So if the zodiac signs are patterns of nature through which planets are manifesting their significations, then 12 parts are patterns that exist within these patterns. In short, I would say that 12 parts show that which is manifested, but on a subtler level. And it might be interesting to add here an information from Indian text Brihad Parashara Hora Shastra that says that Dvadasamsha should be read for parents and grandparents and thus ancestors. So we could consider, many people today consider that the Dvadasamsha should be read to see the ancestral patterns, which might or might not be so. In my opinion, this needs some further evaluation, further testing. But I think that the idea might be sound, so it's worth trying it out. But here we will look at this subtle and hidden aspect in a little bit different way. You can imagine that you have a mystical power by which you can influence a person standing in another room through your astral body. And this is the same, roughly the same way the Hellenistic astrologers and Persian astrologers understood the 12 parts, according to my understanding. That the planet is influencing other points in the horoscope by its hidden position. Why would the 12 parts be useful? Why are they useful? Since they are a very small division of 2.5 degrees, they can help us read horoscopes with stelliums. So we have 4 or 5 planets in one sign. Of course, by 12 parts, unless the conjunction is very tight, they will be in different houses, different signs. They offer a further evaluation tool for exalted or debilitated planets. So if you have debilitated planet, but then it exalts by the 12th part, it's a mitigating factor. They offer additional trigger points for transits. So many times I know we are looking at transits and say, what is showing this event? You know, it's kind of difficult to see, and some bring in the Antischia, Contra Antischia, but we can also bring in the 12 parts as additional trigger points, which I will also show in one example later. They can potentially, as we said, they can potentially show ancestral patterns, and this is something that I'm following and testing quite a bit. And it seems that the 12th part positions mature in adulthood. They become more prominent than in a younger age. It seems that they are developing, that it's something that is, as my friend Lars once said, it seems that they are like in a seed form, and they are kind of unraveling, manifesting throughout the life later. Okay, so, and of course they can also help us in birth time rectification, for sure, a valuable tool. And now we will go to our practical example. So enough of theory. This first part was theoretical, and now some juice. I prepared 4 example charts, as much as I dislike doing this, because especially in the charts of famous people, we tend to just look at that chart through the glasses of what we know. So everything in the chart, if we have a Hollywood star, everything in that chart speaks to us just, okay, a rich man, a famous man. So this is all we see. But that's not the case, you know. Of course, there's a lot of the person, a lot about the person that we don't know. So here we will not analyze whole charts because that would take too much time, and I also don't want to do that. but we will just look at what I think are important factors related to what they are doing. So first example is a devotional singer sings spiritual songs, quite well known. And here we will focus first. Let's focus on Venus as a a planet of art, music, and so what's interesting, we will also bring in the terms. So here again, inside are the erratic positions of the planets. Outside we have 12 parts calculated by multiplication and superimposed onto the main chart. And here we have the terms or the bounds. So an unequal division ruled by 5 non-luminaries. So we have Venus already. Okay, the ascendant falls in the bounds of Venus. Venus is in the 10th house in the bounds of Mars. So here we have a very interesting theme of Martian and Venus, Venusian energy combining. But out of this, would we say immediately, okay, this is somebody who's doing music, and is there any spirituality involved right now? No, we wouldn't say that. Maybe this would be more like a person who is purchasing their desires, their ambitions. But if we look at the, and also maybe there would be some periods of austerity also due to Capricorn. But the 12th part of Venus is in the bounds of Mercury, and Mercury is related to singing. It's also joining Mercury by 12th part, so they are conjunct by 12th part. And it's in Sagittarius in the 9th house. So this immediately connects the Venus through the 12th part to spirituality, religion, God. And Venus, what's also interesting, that we can use 12 parts in aspects. Venus and Jupiter are not connected otherwise. They are what we would say they are in aversion, because they're 2 signs apart. But by 12th part, Venus is aspecting Jupiter by sextile. So this is an important aspect, really, because it's connecting the sense for art, for music, for bringing also pleasure with music to people, with Jupiter, with the ruler of the 9th house of religion. And if we move on, the Sun, of course the Sun is important, is a day chart. It's the sect light, and also in this case the ruler of the chart, the predominator of the chart. And the Sun comes to the bounds of Venus again. So again, Venus in the 11th house, but then by 12th position in the 3rd house in Gemini. Gemini is the sign of music. Traditionally it's the man and woman embraced holding instruments, and falls in the bounds of Venus again. So Venus quite heavily emphasized. Then we have Mars as the ruler of the ascendant, is conjunct the moon, an exalted moon in Taurus. The moon is the planet of music, and in Taurus it's bringing the ideas into manifestation, into something solid, something beautiful. It's a sign of Venus. Earlier in the life, the person was involved in rock and roll, so there's some Martian thing there. And Mars by 12th part comes to the bounds of Venus, again bounds of Venus, in the 8th house. So this is a challenging 12th part position of Mars, and yes, the person did have challenges related to Mars, I will not go into details. But Mars is also aspecting back by the 12th part, opposition to the Moon. So Moon gets influenced by Mars quite heavily. So this is reinforcing, this Mars is reinforcing what we already see in the radix chart. And then Jupiter in the 11th house by 12th part position comes to the 7th house, Libra, with the North Node. So this person has been quite a bit, for quite a long time, always supported by others, always get some gain, some material gain from other people, which is the 7th house, Libra. And then the important 12th, the important Moon and her 12th part. So the Moon is exalted, although in the 2nd house, which is considered a difficult house, but also by 12th part, the Moon comes to the 6th house, a difficult house, and again in the bounds of Mars. So again, more emphasis to the relationship between the Moon and the Mars. So the Moon again influenced by Mars. So yeah, we are dealing, of course, with a passionate person who's been into rock and roll and now singing intense devotional songs. Of course, these positions will have other manifestations, but now we're concerned only with this. So we can move to our next example. This is a horoscope of previous Norwegian king, the King Olav V, who was known as the people's king, because he was very much loved by the people. And he was also quite a bit of a spiritual man, of which I will say more later. Yeah, so let's look at it. So ascendant is in the bounds of Jupiter, in the sign of Jupiter, Sagittarius, which right away gives us a philosophical, religious person, also potentially a leader, because we're dealing with fire sign, and many times Sagittarius is also connected to kingship. And then Jupiter is in the bounds of Mars in the sign of Jupiter, in its own sign, Pisces. So we have a well-dignified, pretty well-dignified ruler of the ascendant, who also by 12th part conjuncts the ascendant. So, wow, Jupiter is quite pronounced there. Yeah, so Jupiter is in the 4th house, so we could say that this could relate to his homeland, and to being the benefactor of all. And then Mars, since we are dealing with a leader who was also the chief in command of the army and was praised to be an excellent military leader and a great very good in strategy. We have Mars in the 11th house, very near the MC, the midheaven. So a powerful angular Mars. By his 12th part position is with Rahu again. Of course, Mars with Rahu creates great generals, and Mars with Rahu again here in the bounds of Jupiter. Basically, Mars is actually in his own bound, in his own bound. What's interesting, we have the sign of Aquarius, the 3rd house, and this Mars tells us something else. It's not just his military side, but he was very good in competitive sports. The 3rd house sports and games, Aquarius, he liked to just go and be there with the general public, you know, step down from his throne and go there, compete and watch sports games. He liked skiing and ski jumping and stuff. So Mars tells us something else. Mars is also aspecting the moon by the 12th part position. So again we have this theme that something that we already see here, the conjunction of Mars and Moon, is getting reinforced by the 12th part. But it also kind of tells us about the nature of this conjunction, because the 12th part of Mars is aspecting the Moon by trine, which is a beneficial aspect. So he's been using his martial side in a, say, positive way. And also Mars is in, by 12th part, Mars is in trine to Mercury in Gemini in the 7th house, which again speaks about his engagement in sports and games and so on. And also he would like to take public bus rides, public train rides, and drive there along with people. And he was considered the friend of all, you know, so that's Mercury there. And Moon and her 12th part, we see the 12th part of the Moon in the 7th house, in Mercury's bound, in the sign of Mercury. He was very fond of literature, which would not be evident right away by looking at the Moon herself without the 12th part. And then Venus in his chart is very interesting. We have Venus in Leo in 9th house. So, okay, the 9th house, Leo, so, okay, it's connected to kings. But what does Venus have to do with that? Well, in the old text, Venus is often connected to wearing the crown. Not necessarily as a king, but more as a priest. And it might be interesting to know here that King Olav has devised his own coronation ceremony, the consecration ceremony in a cathedral. And he actually, you know, was in charge of a ceremony. So he was very actively engaged as a priest, we could say. And he considered this to be the peak of his life, the consecration ceremony where he took an oath and made a covenant with the people of Norway to be their king and leader. And Venus there falls in the bounds of Mars in less degrees of Taurus. So in her own sign, bounds on Mars, 6th house of enemies. So he was a very skilled politician and very skilled, very good in, what is it? I forgot the word. Never mind. In diplomacy, right. Well, now I remembered it. So we can see how the 12 parts can either confirm something that's already there, or give us a hint about the nature of that what's already there, or give us some another a different view on the planet. So it's like in this example, okay, Venus is in the 9th house, but it's also in the 6th house, and the Moon is in the 11th house, but it's also in the 7th house. And then the Sun, of course, I left that for the end, because a king with the Sun in the 8th house, you know, the Sun at the position that's at the level of our eyes, at blinds, as we can't really comfortably look at it. That's a little bit strange. We wouldn't expect this to see in a chart of a king especially not someone who was considered a Norwegian of the century. And the 12th part of the sun is in the 11th house, which is a very auspicious house. But it's not very stellar in terms of dignity. We have a fallen sun in the chart of a king. But it is this fallen sun in the 11th house that speaks about what we have said before, that he was a type of a king who likes to step down from the throne and join with the common folk. And one time they asked him, when he was riding a train, if he's not afraid to go like this, you know, just to join the common folk without bodyguards. And he said, well, why would I be afraid, because I have 4 million of bodyguards. So he was like that. He would like to be, you know, a part of the the whole community. Okay, our next example is a painter, a very good, very skilled painter. Here we would expect Mercury and Venus to somehow be prominently expressed, and the ascendant falls in the bounds of Mercury, in the sign of Mercury, Virgo, the precise, skillful Virgo, the perfectionist. And Mercury is in the 9th house, in his own bound, in Taurus. So Taurus is where we create beautiful forms, and Mercury is our hands, our skills. So here we have a potential artist who's creating some beautiful forms, possibly related to the 9th house topic of spirituality. And yes, this is an artist who creates paintings that express some spiritual truths. And Mercury is in the 2nd house by the 12th part position, which also then connects the 2nd house to Mercury. And yes, the person is actually making money, surviving. Then we have the moon, also always important for any type of art, in the bounds of Venus, 4th house, expressing one's inner feelings, and by 12th part position in the 9th house, in the bounds of Venus, in her exaltation. So the moon is exalted by her 12th part in the 9th house. So we have art and 9th house pretty much expressed now. And the moon is also trying to the ascendant by her 12th part, which is an important strengthening thing. And next we have Venus. We have excellent Venus, angular, exalted, and in her own bounds. So wow, a very loudly expressed Venus. And Venus is in the 10th house by her 12th part in her own bounds. So Venus is in the bounds of Venus in Gemini, you know, in the sign of creative skills with one's hands and so on. And Venus by her 12th part is aspecting the moon, position to the moon. And yes, I think that speaks quite clearly. And the 4th example I have is a famous football player, a French football player, Zinedine Zidane. Here we would expect Mars to somehow speak to us, and the ascendant is indeed in the bounds of Mars. Mars is not very well placed. In the 3rd house, okay, that's something we could expect from an athlete, but is fallen in Cancer, in the sign of Cancer, and in the bounds of Saturn, in the malefic bounds, also together with the South Node. So, would we say that this is a chart of a famous, one of the most famous football players of all time? I don't think so. But by 12th part, at least Mars becomes more angular, comes to the first house, so at least gets a little bit out of debilitation. Bounds of Jupiter, so there is some beneficence to it. And then we have Venus as the ascendant lord in the second house. Well, that might be productive to for the person's income, which is then confirmed strongly because the second house is not enough, and that's just taking care of the basic stuff of life. But Venus by 12th part is in the 11th house of gain, exalted in her own bounds, joined by 12th part the second lord, Mercury. So here we have a little bit more view into, you know, the second house money stuff by 12th part. And Venus is also aspecting by square by 12th part the second house, also squaring Saturn, which is the ruler of the 10th, the place of actions. And also it's aspecting Jupiter, which is fallen, as we can see, by sextile. So Jupiter is getting some relief, some help from an exalted Venus. And if we look at Jupiter, gets from the cadent 9th house into the 10th house of actions, becomes, instead of cadent, becomes quite busy and angular by the 12th part position. So the chart is no longer so much about, you know, because if we go back a little bit, there's basically, we don't have any angularity, you know, something we wouldn't expect in a chart of such a prominent person. But then we get, by 12th part positions, things are quite different. And then the 12th part of the moon, here Jupiter by 12th part also aspects Saturn, so another, so we have an influence of two benefics onto Saturn by 12 parts. And the moon is in the 7th house, fallen, but in her own house, in her own sign, by 12 parts. So I mean, the chart, if we look at it without the 12 parts, it's kind of lackluster, you know.
Rok, your audio is off. Your audio is off. Yeah, it's okay now.
Is it okay?
Yes.
I don't hear it.
It's okay now.
I don't hear you.
Okay.
No. So we're having some technical difficulties, I guess. Yeah. It looks like it's fine on my part. 1-2 minutes. I can't hear you. Okay, let's just. Okay. We need to solve some technical issues. Okay, I'll just go on. Okay, let's type to Ashwin. I'll just continue. Haha. Good. Okay, let's go back to our final examples. And yeah. Okay, so let's continue. And for the end, I would like to show how they can work with transits. This is an example of a childbirth. These are the transits on that day. It's a female child, so she gave birth to a child on that day. And we will look at the moon as the ruler of the fifth, as the ruler. No, it's not. That's a typo, so ignore that. Moon as the ruler of the fifth house of children. We will focus on Saturn as the ruler of the moon, because moon is in Capricorn. And Saturn is also the ruler of the 11th house, which is like a secondary house of children, because the 11th is the joy of Jupiter, and it's also the 5th from the 7th, so it indicates the children of one spouse. And we will focus on Jupiter as the natural significator of children, and in this case also the Lord of the Ascendant. So if we look at the 12th parts, the 12th part of Jupiter is at about 2 degrees of Scorpio. So this is the 12th part of Jupiter. And on that day, the 5th Lord, the moon, was transiting right over Jupiter, the 12th part of Jupiter. So an important Lord, the 5th Lord, was conjunct the 12th part of Jupiter, which is the natural significator of children and the ruler of the Ascendant. And then if we look at Saturn as the ruler of the moon and the ruler of the 11th, this is the 12th part of Saturn, and this is the transit. We have transiting Jupiter in conjunction, not very tight, but you know, during the pregnancy, this is what's been going on. And still I would consider this as a quite an intense conjunction still, although Jupiter is already separating. So we have again an important factor conjunct another important factor, and Jupiter, you know, being the expansion of the theme that's signified by Saturn in this case. So in this way we can see that all the 3 important factors somehow aligned very nicely for the person on that day, and this is how we can use the 12 parts as the additional trigger points. So you can experiment with that. In my experience, they are very valuable. So this brought us to the end of this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and yeah, that's it for my part. If there are any questions, feel free to ask, feel free to type them.
Do you hear me, Rok, now?
Oh, thank you for your attention. Cool. I'm done, Ashwin.
Do you hear me?
No, I can't hear you. There's something wrong with your mic, I guess.
I don't know.
Oh.
It's okay?
No, still nothing. No.
I don't know what's wrong.
Do you see the signal on your part
Yeah,
when you
yeah, yeah.
speak? Ah, it says that you are muted.
But I'm not.
No, now you're not muted when it still doesn't work.
Yeah, that's kind of.
Mercury is cooking it up now.
No.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
my car just broke today, so I got my share of this. Oh, still nothing.
No, I don't know what's wrong.
Yeah, before you tapped it a little bit and it started to work.
Okay.
Can you check the settings? The audio settings, maybe something got changed on your part. Oh yeah, that's I will just add this until Ashwin takes care of the technical stuff. What's interesting that today my car broke. The steering wheel just stopped functioning, and I was lucky that this didn't happen on the road but on the parking lot instead. And the conjunction right now of Mars, Rahu, the North Node, and Mercury is sextile to my 12th part of Mercury, which is in the 8th house. So otherwise, by regular aspects, this would not be visible, but by aspecting the 12th part, there you go.
Okay.
Still nothing? Okay. Ashwin says, I have to say goodbye, so goodbye. Thank you.